Hello, I'm a research associate with Feed My Sheep Foundation and a member of the Protect Child Health Coalition, though not a spokesperson for them. I'm also a former school counselor, having worked in a small suburban school in New York State for several years. Today we're going to be discussing comprehensive sexuality education and gender ideology in the schools. In this video, which is part 1 of 2, we're going to look at an overview of what is happening in schools with regard to comprehensive sexuality education and gender ideology. Then we're going to look at grade level standards and curriculum examples. Then we're going to take a look at the effectiveness of these programs. I do want to first acknowledge and appreciate any Christians who are teachers or other school personnel. It's such a great benefit to the children that you're there. This presentation is also for you, as well as parents or anyone else with an interest in protecting children. I think when I was in the school, I wasn't necessarily aware of the bigger picture of some of what was happening with regards to sex ed. And I think back and know that I would have been definitely benefited by conversations like this and really emboldened to stand for truth in various situations that I found myself in. So this is certainly something that is good to know for the teachers. Second, I want to acknowledge that I think most people involved with sex ed or teachers in schools or administrators have a positive intent that they want to love and teach kids. Unfortunately, I do think that this is an area of the world and our culture that shows us the depravity of man without God, that we would think it's good, yet be sexualizing children, brainwashing them to believe abortion is good, convincing them that their biology is meaningless. Ultimately, the people involved are in need of God's grace and mercy, as we also are, and we should respond in love to those that have fallen victim to these teachings. Love and truth. The things we're going to discuss are fairly disturbing and upsetting. So it's important for us to stay grounded in the fact that Jesus offers us reality, true identity, a sense of worth, forgiveness, and healing. And so from that, we can respond in true love for the children and pray for repentance of all of those involved in causing little ones to stumble. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. Psalm 139. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Matthew 18. I wanted to start with these 2 verses to give us some context for the discussions that we're having. Just to remind us that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and so is every child, and that we do have a duty to protect them. Okay, so what is happening? Our children are being introduced to harmful gender ideology starting in pre-K. They're being encouraged to reconsider their gender. They're being exposed to sexually explicit materials and lessons and books. They're being taught age-inappropriate sexual information. And they're being introduced to abortion and all contraception choices in a positive manner. There are bills right now in legislative committee for comprehensive sexuality education. So if passed, these bills would mandate comprehensive sex ed for all children starting in kindergarten and continuing through 12th grade. So though these laws would expand it, it is already occurring, so that is important for us to realize that this isn't something that's just going to possibly happen, that it is already happening, but these bills being passed would certainly expand it. So right now it is already occurring through individual school policies, through individual activist teachers, through school libraries and databases, through after-school clubs, under the guise of bullying prevention. I know that's how a lot of this was taught in the school that I previously worked at, through the social work or counseling offices, and through social media, of course. Okay, jumping into the learning standards. So we're going to look at some standards for different chunks of grade levels from the National Sex Ed Standards. So this is what would be mandated if the bills in committee are passed. But again, certainly being used already across the country. So this is for grades kindergarten through second grade, and one of the learning standards is here: define gender, gender identity, and gender role stereotypes. And then this is the definition of gender identity from the standards that they would want kindergartners to understand. How an individual identifies based on their internal understanding of their gender. Gender identities may include male, female, agender, androgynous, genderqueer, non-binary, transgender, and many others, or a combination thereof. This is the first example of a book that can be used to teach the learning standard we just looked at about gender identity for kindergarten through second graders. It's called Who Are You? The Kid's Guide to Gender Identity, and we're just going to look at a few pages from the book. This page reads, "Babies can't talk, so grown-ups make a guess by looking at their bodies. This is the sex assigned to you at birth, male or female. Sometimes people get this confused with gender, but gender is much more than the body you were born with. Some people say there are only two genders, but there are really many genders. You are who you say you are because you know you best." And then the teacher is seen writing on the board, "I am, girl, boy, both, neither, just me," and small children, probably about kindergarten age, are shown going up to the board and pointing to neither and just me. These are just a few words people use: trans, genderqueer, non-binary, gender fluid, transgender, gender neutral, agender, neutrois, bigender, third gender, two-spirit, and there are even more words people are using to describe their experience. This is called the gender spectrum. At the end of the book, there's a wheel where children can interact and explore different gender identities and gender expressions. On the first wheel, they indicate whether they have a body that made adults guess that they were a boy, guess that they were a girl, or say they weren't sure. In the middle wheel, they have 18 choices of gender identities: third gender, bigender, transgender, both girl and boy. And then the last wheel, they indicate things that they like to do and things they like to wear, their gender expression. This is a second example of a book that can be used in kindergarten through second grade. It's called It Feels Good to Be Yourself, and again, this meets the learning standard about teaching gender and gender identity. Okay, we're going to look at a couple of pages from this book. When people guess wrong, it's okay to let them know. Ruthie was 5 when she told her parents, "I know you think I'm a boy, but really I feel like a girl." The next page, they're all embracing as a family, and the book reads, "Oops, Ruthie was a girl all along. They just didn't know it at first." You might feel like a boy, you might feel like a girl. You might feel like both boy and girl, or like neither. You might feel like your gender changes from day to day or from year to year. You might feel that none of these words describes you perfectly. You might not be sure yet. Maybe you're still figuring it out. Again, this book encouraging children that their gender is changeable, that they can change it based on how they feel day to day, year to year, and that it's something that they have to figure out. So it's really encouraging kids to explore their gender identity and that it's something that they will be choosing. This third and final example for the kindergarten through second grade learning standard about gender identity is I Am Jazz, written by Jazz Jennings, who was a male that transitioned to identify as a female and has a reality TV series that documented that transition, including the surgeries. Just going to show these couple of pages from the book. The book heavily focuses on Jazz's preferences, colors and activities and things to wear, indicating that this is very related to Jazz's gender. So this page reads, "For as long as I can remember, my favorite color has been pink. My second favorite color is silver, and my third favorite color is green." The next page reads, "I have a girl brain, but a boy body. This is called transgender. I was born this way." So our youngest students starting in kindergarten, and honestly this does start before. I've seen teachers advocating for this in preschool and videos online. But in summary of the books that are being read at this age, it's teaching them that gender is a choice, that it can change from day to day, that their biological sex is just a meaningless guess that parents and doctors make when they're born, that it has no other meaning other than that. That their color, clothing, and activity preferences actually define their gender. That kids can be born in the wrong body or have a brain of one gender and a body of another, which is obviously scientifically very inaccurate. Every single cell in the human body that's viable is actually the sex that you were born with. So it's either male or female. There's not different sex in the brain, or anything like that. Kids understand themselves and how they fit in the world at just 5 years old and should correct their parents, such as in that one book with Ruthie, and it encourages other kids when they know themselves best to tell their family. So, and this is indicated that Ruthie was able to do that at 5. These books teach that kids should focus on figuring out their gender identity and that you can be both a girl and a boy, neither a girl or a boy, or a list of several other choices other than male or female. And it makes it fun to pick something other than traditional boy or girl. The books, obviously, the rainbow wheels and things like that, are encouraging kids to really explore other gender choices. These are just some other examples of books that I could have selected, but these are other books that are being read. Jacob's New Dress, Are You a Boy or Are You a Girl? A House for Everyone, Red, A Crayon Story, Being You, and Introducing Teddy. Moving on to the next set of grade levels, grades 3 through 5, we're going to look at a few different learning standards. First, describe the role hormones play in the physical, social, cognitive, and emotional changes during adolescence and the potential role of hormone blockers on young people who identify as transgender. So they're teaching children about hormone blockers to let them know that there are pharmaceuticals to help them align their bodies with the gender that they chose based on the information they had provided them in kindergarten through 2nd grade. And 2 others for these grade levels. Explain that gender expression and gender identity exist along a spectrum, so certainly driving home the point that there's not males and females or men and women, but that gender identity is a spectrum and there's countless options. And explain common human sexual development and the role of hormones, which that part might be more age appropriate for specifically for 5th grade, but then it goes on to describe romantic and sexual feelings and masturbation. So that's clearly not age appropriate for grades 3 through 5. For discussing gender identity on a spectrum, this is one example of a book for this age group called They, She, He, Me, Free to Be. This page reads, creating pronouns. Not only can he and she mean more than what people think, there are also more pronouns than just she and he. You are not alone if he and she don't fit. Many people have played with pronouns and still do because of how they feel inside. Here are some ideas. You can use your own name as your pronoun. You can change pronouns from he to she or from she to he. You can use new ones like Z or create your own like tree. And then there's a book, I Am Tree, that goes along with this. Some people use they, which is a perfect way. There are many more pronouns waiting to be discovered and used. People are creating new pronouns all the time. So this is encouraging children to explore different pronouns and to change their pronouns or even create a new one, to be creative. This next example is It's Perfectly Normal, and it's recommended for age 10 and up. Here are some of the reviews from Amazon of the book It's Perfectly Normal. I just wanted to include this to show that it is being used currently in schools. So this first one, used this book to teach puberty lessons. Fantastic. Here's another one. This is my go-to book for teaching sexuality education in middle school. Here's another one. This is the standard book for age-appropriate sexuality education. I've used it several times in a church school setting. This one is says that they recommend it for 8th grade or older, but the book was recommended for 5th grade at her daughter's school. And then this review says, we bought this book because they were using it at my son's middle school. As a warning, there are graphic images that are coming up next. The images are blurred out, but they are not blurred out in the book that children would have access to. They're just blurred out for this presentation. Again, addressing the learning standards about masturbation, it's possible that this would be discussed or shown in class, and this page has images to show the children, and the chapter explains how to masturbate and makes a point about sexual pleasure. It states, some religions call masturbation a sin, but masturbating cannot hurt you. It explains orgasm, and then another quote in the chapter is, some people become sexually excited without masturbating just by looking at sexy pictures. So this is very concerning that they're really grooming children to masturbate and look at pornography. Moving on to middle school, these learning standards are for grades 6 through 8. First, define sexual identity and explain a range of identities related to sexual orientation: heterosexual, bisexual, lesbian, gay, queer, two-spirit, asexual, pansexual. And then another learning standard, define vaginal, oral, and anal sex. And then the definitions in the National Sex Ed Standards include the use of sex toys for vaginal and anal sex. Again, this is starting in 6th grade, where some children are 11 years old. And to others for middle school, explain there are many methods of short and long-term contraception that are safe and effective, and describe how to access them. So we know that many of the sex ed curriculums are created by and even delivered by Planned Parenthood. So we have Planned Parenthood coming in to talk to our kids about contraception and tell them to access their organization for contraception. They also talk about how they're safe and effective, and in these lessons they definitely do not discuss any of the side effects, which there are many. So they're training children to believe that all forms of contraception are safe and effective, which is just not the message that is true and honest and thorough for them or age appropriate. And then explain the impact that media, including sexually explicit media, otherwise known as pornography, can have on one's body image and self-esteem. So they are now discussing pornography in the classroom in middle school, starting when your child is 11 years old. Back to example number 5, it's perfectly normal. And this does come with another graphic content warning for the next slide. One of the images, I did block out a little bit of it. This chapter that could meet the learning standard for middle school about defining vaginal, oral, and anal sex is called A Kind of Sharing, Cuddling, Kissing, Touching, and Sexual Intercourse, and it has examples in the pictures of same-sex couples. Example number 6 is the genderbread person. This one is very popular, and this is the specific lesson that was being used at the school that I formerly worked at. And it is pretty common in middle school and probably high school as well. So it talks about how gender identity is in the brain, attraction is in the heart, your anatomical sex is only in the genitals, and then your gender expression is obviously all over your body. And then the second half of the worksheet explains that each of those items, so gender identity, gender expression, anatomical sex, sexual attraction, and romantic attraction, are on a spectrum. So the spectrum starts out as nothing, so you can be neither male or female, and then it goes to very feminine or very masculine, and then you can students are instructed to indicate where they lie on each of these spectrums. And I think that this one is unique in that it's even identifying anatomical sex as a spectrum and asking students to indicate what their anatomical sex either looks like or appears to be based on this spectrum that they've defined as from nothing to femaleness or maleness. Fairly incredibly, everything we've discussed to this point is all before high school. So now moving into the grades 9 through 10 learning standards, one that we're going to look at is describe effective ways to communicate consent, personal boundaries, and desires as they relate to intimacy, pleasure, and sexual behavior. So there's a very strong focus in the high school years on maximizing sexual pleasure, and that being a critical component of the lessons in class. I reached out to Planned Parenthood of the Finger Lakes and the Buffalo and Niagara Falls regions because their educators are very commonly going into schools in the area. Planned Parenthood is certainly a major provider of sex ed in all public schools, and not every single public school uses them, but many, many do. So I asked them what curriculums they use, and this was one of their main choices is be proud, be responsible. So we're going to look at a couple examples from there. So we mentioned that the lessons in the high school are often focused on pleasure. And it's important to realize that this emphasis and focus on pleasure eliminates from the discussion any context of love, commitment, marriage. So the curriculums don't discuss union between husband and wife or anything like that. It really tells kids that they decide when they're ready and that they have agency, sexual agency, to determine who they want to have sex with, when they want to have sex with them. And then they emphasize in the classroom presentations about maximizing pleasure. So really not what most families would expect or want from their child's sex ed curriculum. So this first example here is a quote of how a teacher would start a conversation for one of the lessons. People often say that sex doesn't feel as good with a condom, but we're going to talk about ways to make the experience more pleasurable. The next quote, again, another thing that a teacher is supposed to say to a class. Touching and stroking each other all over can be very pleasurable. People who are better lovers know about their own bodies and a partner's body. And then the next quote is about role play. And it says, the goal of this role play is for Lee to convince Jaden to use a condom and that condoms can be fun and pleasurable. So students then are asked in the class to role play sexual initiation and encouraging their peers in class about the pleasure of sex. So it's just very inappropriate and can lead to very uncomfortable conversations between students. And in this curriculum on page 263, there's a note to teachers that says, teachers are instructed to require all students to participate in role plays, even if they feel uncomfortable doing so. So even if a student says, I'm uncomfortable participating in this conversation, they are told that they have to participate. Two more 9th and 10th grade learning standards we're going to briefly look at. The first, demonstrate the steps to using barrier methods correctly. Example, external and internal condoms, dental dams. So these similar learning standards were in the middle school, discussing the steps to using barrier methods. And oftentimes this does happen more in middle school, and I've even seen examples of 5th graders using penis models in classrooms, but certainly by early high school, this is something that is happening. And, it goes beyond any learning about it from a teacher or a video, and they're actually hands-on in the classroom based on this learning standard. And then the second one, identify medically accurate sources of information about and local services that provide contraceptive methods, including emergency contraception and condoms, and pregnancy options, including parenting, abortion, adoption, and prenatal care. So it's an expected standard that students know how to access abortions and know how to access emergency contraception. This example is called the 3 R's, rights, respect, responsibility. So for this 9th grade lesson for the 3 R's, the teacher is told, walk into the room, hold up the wooden penis model or banana and condom, and say, today's the day. Divide the class into pairs, distribute a banana and 2 condoms to each pair, and the steps to putting on a condom handout. And then the students proceed to practice putting on condoms with peers in class on these models or the bananas. And they're correcting each other and instructing each other on condom use. And then at the end of the class, the teacher says, well, knowing how to use condoms doesn't mean anything if you don't actually have them in the first place. What are some places you know of where you can get condoms? And then the homework assignment is listed on your screen. Before the next class, you need to visit one of these places and get a condom. In each situation, you must interact with at least one adult. So the homework assignment is for every 9th grade child to obtain condoms and, in the process, interact with adults to judge their reaction and to just make sure that they feel more confident asking for condoms. Also from this curriculum, a couple of more examples. The first one here, students discuss the pros and cons of becoming a parent, putting a baby up for adoption, and having an abortion. Each of these options has reasons why someone would want to do it and reasons why someone would not want to do it. In the end, however, it is every pregnant person's right to choose what they do about their pregnancy. So there's several concerns about this. First, every pregnant person. So that's very purposeful language. A lot of the curriculums say do not use the words women and men anymore because they're trying to eliminate that binary. So now any person can become pregnant, including a man, because it could be a transgender person or a non-binary person. So instead of saying pregnant women or pregnant girls, it's every pregnant person's right. And then second, obviously it's very concerning that they are encouraging children to discuss the pros of having abortions and really encouraging them to flesh that out. And then also that it's encouraging children that other people in their life don't have meaningful input. So it says it's only that person's right to choose. And so it's eliminating the fact that there's another partner involved that has a say in this and maybe wanting to parent a child, and, you know, the important input from parents or people from church. So it's concerning that they're encouraging children to make decisions like this completely on their own. And then the next example here, if a clinic receives Title X funding, they must provide contraception without a parent or caregiver's consent. And this is in a 10th grade lesson. So they're talking to children about having abortions and then also talking to them about how to access contraception without talking to their parents about it. So the organizations behind this are Planned Parenthood, who has an obvious interest in encouraging children to have sex and to have abortions. And then these are two other examples. SECUS, whose slogan is Sex Ed for Social Change, and they're on the left here with a post from September that says, everyone deserves barrier-free access to abortion care, regardless of their age, full stop. 21 states mandate parental consent for a young person to access abortion care, with an additional 17 states mandating parental notification. Bold solutions now, abortion justice can't wait. So they're encouraging people to advocate that children should be able to get abortions without even notifying their parents. And this is the main creator of the learning standards, along with Advocates for Youth, who this is something they posted in November. Shout out to the young people like Michaela who are at the forefront of spreading awareness about self-managed abortion. And yes, it's safe. And then they have links to learn more about abortion. And the graphic is abortions save lives. So these are the messages that we're giving to our children through their sex ed. In later high school, a lot of the learning standards are similar but more in depth to what was discussed throughout earlier schooling years. One that we're going to look at is about sexually explicit media, and they have to describe the characteristics of unhealthy relationships and things such as that in pornography. In the example lesson plan, we're looking at the 3 R's again. And this lesson was so graphic that I'm not going to even include images here. It was a PowerPoint that was used that had pornography, so it was covers of Playboy magazine, Penthouse magazine, and many others, and it asked the teenagers to view these pictures and then discuss how the media uses sex to sell. And then this is the quote here: viewing sexually explicit media is not considered a negative by everyone, but people should keep in mind that it is fantasy and not reality. So they are definitely at least saying pornography is okay, if not encouraging pornography, because they're actually asking them to look at pornography in the classroom on this PowerPoint and then discuss it. That brings us to the end of our learning standards and curriculum examples. So in summary, clearly agenda-driven, not based on teaching children the basics of reproduction in any means. It includes sexually explicit materials. It is clearly age inappropriate and inappropriate for school in general. It teaches children a gender ideology that is inaccurate and very confusing and harmful for them, and contrary to that which parents would want their children learning. And it is medically inaccurate, certainly with regards to the gender ideology and what they're teaching about anatomical sex. So certainly CSE is inappropriate, and certainly it is agenda driven, but is it effective at maybe decreasing teen pregnancies or decreasing STD rates amongst teens, which is what the Department of Health and Human Services website says that these programs are good for? Well, the most comprehensive review of the literature was done on 103 studies of school-based comprehensive sex ed, and only 6% of those found effectiveness. So effectiveness was determined to be an improvement on a key outcome, for example, if it was looking to decrease teen pregnancy, for example, for the intended population for 12 months with no negative effects, which makes sense because you'd want the program to have an effect for at least a year before the children are going through a similar program the next year. And so only 6% of studies found that evidence of effectiveness. And what's more concerning is 16% of the programs found evidence of harmful effects. So less kids were using condoms, more kids were having increased sexual activity, increased number of partners, increased rates of teen pregnancy, increased rates of STDs. So more often it was harmful than it was effective. Yet these programs are still listed as effective programs with the Department of Health and Human Services for schools to use. And that brings us to the end of Part 1, Comprehensive Sexuality Education and Gender Ideology in the Schools. We encourage you to check out video number 2, where we explore the harms of gender ideology and talk about what we can do to protect our children. Thank you so much for watching.